Hey, we're back with our penguin. He is rigged and weight painted and ready to be animated a bit before we export him to Unity. So if you haven't been following along, make sure to check out the previous videos and see how we can rig a character like this. And just to show you where we're at this point, you can move these bones and it will deform the mesh appropriately. This is a simple model, and as such, we're going to do a pretty simple animation. And I'll show you some hints at how you can come in and make this a little more interesting. But for now, because we're more focused on the transition from Blender into Unity, we're going to take these bones, do very simple animations, and then go through that process. So first off, if you have your mesh open, but you can't see the bones or the names or something like that, come over here onto the right side. This is in Blender 2.8. The little guy here, this green man symbol, running person symbol, I should correct that. And the things you can display are in front. So if your bones aren't showing up, you can click in front. You can choose axes to show or hide the axes. I like to keep them visible just so that I can see which direction I should rotate. And then also the names. I like to keep these on as well because I know which bone I'm working with. And it makes me not be lazy and accidentally call something bone.003 or something like that. So animation in Blender is not the most intuitive part, so hopefully we can go through this in a productive way. First, I want you to come into this animation tab, this workspace, and then we're going to do our work in these two windows and then sort of just visualize it and manipulate some things in this window. So the first thing I want you to do is in 3D, in the 3D view, hold your mouse over this area and hit the N key, and that'll allow us to see these transforms. Okay, and we're going to basically modify a few things to do rotations. We're going to create an idle animation, moving forward animation, a turning left, and a turning right, so that we can bring this into Unity and control it with the keyboard so that we can slide around on his belly. So first thing I want to point out here is that we have rotation is set up with quaternions, and quaternions are the mathematical way that 3D programs can manipulate rotations without having some of the problems of the XYZ rotation. The main problem with it is that it's not very intuitive for us as humans, or at least not for me, and I like to work in XYZ Euler. So that I can think about, oh, I'm going to turn it this much around the x-axis and then this much around the y-axis and so forth. So I would recommend, if you're going to work with these things, you can change this into XYZ, and then we'll be able to change the Z rotation and turn his head. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Now I'm going to switch this box right here into the curve, or the graph editor, and we'll be switching back and forth between the graph editor and another editor, but for now we're going to add our first animation here. And because Unity starts at frame 0 instead of frame 1, we're going to change this window down here in the bottom right corner to 0. And you'll notice that this kind of pops over here, and now there's this black line. So it starts at 0, and if I hit this jump to the last frame, it'll jump to there. So we're going to start by creating an idle animation. And the way I want to do this actually is I'm going to go into the action editor here. I'm going to choose this drop down, go into action editor. It looks pretty much the same, but it's going to allow us to separate these things into different tracks so that we can create our idle, create our moving and turning, and then they'll be imported separately to Unity instead of all as just one sequential path that we need to split up manually. So you should have this button here that says New. We're going to click New, and it's called Action. We'll come back and we'll rename this in a moment. So for now, I want to, for our idle animation, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just rotate his head back and forth. So idle, typically you would have like maybe the wings would move, maybe he would breathe a little bit, maybe he would wiggle his feet, chomp his beak a little bit. But to keep things simple, when he's just standing still, I'm going to have him look back and forth a little bit. So select the head bone here and then hit the I key on your keyboard. And what we want to do is we want to insert a keyframe for the location and rotation. So that's going to lock in this 0, 0, 0 here on frame 0. And then we want to go forward some number of frames. Let's say we'll go to frame 19, so that's 20 frames in, since we're starting at 0. And then I'm going to rotate the z-axis maybe around -10. I'm not going to be perfect with this. And then I'm going to hit I again, location, rotation. And now I'm not actually changing the location of this, but my experiments have led me to find out that if you don't do location and rotation when you put the keyframe, it doesn't seem to work. I think that might be because it's moving both the, it's rotating, but it's also moving this part of the bone in space. So I don't know. If you can find a way to get it to work with only rotation, go ahead. But for me, just locking in the location and the rotation seems to work best. So we can hide that. We don't need it visible. And then for the next one, let's go to about 39, and we're going to change this to more of a positive number, about positive 10. Use the I key to insert another one with location rotation. And then we're going to bring it back maybe here to 0. And then hit I in location rotation. So now if I shrink this down, you can click on this and you can kind of shrink it down to maybe the last frame here, 59. And then if we play this, it should kind of loop this animation. Okay, so this will be our idle animation. And we can change a few things if we want to. You notice that when you play this, he kind of brings his head to a stop for a second in the middle, but maybe we don't want that stop. Let's change that. So this is where this curve or this graph editor comes in handy. You can edit the curves of how this thing appears. And as you can see right here, the graph is kind of hard to see. We can fix this a couple ways. One that tends to work is if you hover your mouse over it and press the period key on your number pad, then it should focus in on this. If for some reason that doesn't work, if it kind of focuses in on it, but it's not quite right, you can grab these little circles here and you can change them as needed to sort of fix your window view. The same thing works here. Pretty much anywhere in the editor, if you're trying to work with it, you can move these little circles as opposed to just the bars. Because if I'm just trying to use the bars and it's not focused incorrectly, it's not going to go well. But these circles can really help with that. But we can see this pretty well. Maybe I will shrink this down a little bit. We have what's happening here is we have these curves that are kind of coming to a point here. It's going slow, then speeding up, and then kind of doing this sine wave and then slowing down at the end. That's why we're seeing that kind of blip at the end. It's slowing down and then speeding back up again instead of just doing one continuous motion as it continues in loops. So let's fix that. And the biggest problem you'll have is if you try to grab that point, there's a bunch of other lines here that are in the way. So if we expand this menu, we can actually hide the locations and we can hide everything but the Z rotation. Remember, we were rotating around this Z axis here. So we'll hide these by clicking the I symbol. And then we only have this Z Euler rotation showing. We can select this and we'll smooth it out by just grabbing this. Okay, now we could mess with these and try and make it a smoother curve, but I'm not going to bother with that. Now you'll see that it's a much smoother transition in between. If you look over here, there's no jumping that happens. Okay, so this is our idle animation, and we want to rename this and kind of get a fresh template for our next animation. So we're going to switch this view here from the graph editor to the nonlinear animation editor here. And you'll see up here that we have something that matches the name of this, action. So I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to call it idle and hit enter. And then I'm going to click this symbol, push action down onto the top of the NLA stack as a new strip. Okay, so now we have idle in here in this NLA track. You can rename this if you like. I don't think it makes much of a difference because we're going to be exporting this into Unity. But now you'll see that not only did that get pushed down into its own track, it also cleared this out for us. So we can create a new action that will show up in another track. Now, I want to just point out something that took me way too long to figure out. So if you are working in here and let's say you created a track that you didn't like, and one way you can do that is with this menu. You can add a track. So let's say I have a track in here that's cluttering it up because maybe I created an animation that didn't end up working out. If you want to delete this, if you were to select this, you can't even tell that it's selected, but it is. By the way, you can rename it same as you can do the other thing. You can double click. But if you select this, and if you move your mouse over here and you're not thinking about it and you hit delete, then it's going to delete the selected idle thing. And now that's not in a track anymore. So I'm going to undo that because that's not what I wanted to do. If I select this and keep my mouse in this area and hit the delete key, it deletes that track. It's kind of like when you're working in different windows, like you hit a key and it does a different thing. But this one really got me because I'm not used to having this, there's not really much of a separation between these two windows. Either way, now you know you can delete those. You can also delete them from here as you just saw. It's just whether something is selected or not before you delete it. Okay, so we've got idle. Now, I also want to do something really quick before I forget. This armature, we're going to rename this to penguin. Oh, it doesn't like that. So the reason is because over here we've already got something called penguin. If I'm going to double click on this and call it penguin_mesh so that it's distinguished when we pull it into Unity, and then I can double click over here as well and rename it to penguin. It doesn't really matter where you rename it, but this way the armature is going to show up as being called penguin, and these animations are going to be imported to Unity as penguin, and then one of those sort of straight up and down slash symbols. I don't know what it's called, a pipe maybe. The one that's basically right on the same key as your backslash key, but with the shift enable. It's going to be that, and then penguin idle, penguin forward. So that just helps make things a little cleaner when you import it to Unity. So now we've got our idle. We're going to get to our next animation. So we're going to create a new one. And right away, if you want, you can rename this. We'll call it forward. And we're going to do a pretty simple animation. We're going to grab the root here. And I'm going to, over the course of 60 frames, well, let's do 30 frames actually for this. I think this will be something that goes a little quicker. Maybe he'll be moving 1 meter per second. We can always tweak this later. But we're going to move this root bone from here to here. So I'm going to, first of all, make sure I'm on frame 0 and hit the I key. And I don't need to change the rotation for this one, so I'll just do location. So we've locked in this 0, 0, 0 position. And then I'm going to move him forward forward for him is actually the negative Y axis. So this direction coming this way. And so I'll set this to -1 here. And then oh shoot, undo that, Control Z. I need to move forward the number of frames first. So I'll go to frame 29, and then, so that's 30 frames forward, and then I'll do -1 here. And then I'll hit I, location. And then if we just try animating that, it's going to do that. Now, one thing that you'll see that's happening is it's doing the idle animation on top of this movement, which in this case is fine, but if we had done something else, if we were doing the turns, for example, it's going to start turning and moving forward at the same time. We don't want that. That's just a matter of up here in this NLA editor, just unchecking this, and it will play this top one. So if I just hit play, now he's not moving his head. Okay, so that's looking pretty good to me. The only thing that I want to change about this is I want to open the graph editor, and let's isolate just the Y location. We'll hit the period key on the number pad to view this. And by the way, if you don't have a number pad, you can go into here and go to View and View Selected. You see it says numpad period here. So that'll allow us to do the same thing. And then you can change this to linear, because right now, if you do it this way, every time he moves, he's going to go whoop, whoop. He's going to kind of do little hops. So we're not going to grab the points this time. We're actually going to right click, or once we've selected this, we're going to right click on it, change the interpolation mode to linear so that it's just a smooth transition, or the smooth movement the entire time. So it doesn't slow down at all. And then if we press play, it's just going to go smoothly. And we'll be looping this in Unity, so you don't need to do anything special to loop it now. Okay, so we've done that one, and we're ready to push it down. And we can actually push down from here. If we click this push down, it clears this out. We can go back and look at the nonlinear animation thing, and now we've got forward on here. And this is checked, so we want to uncheck it so that it's not playing while we work on our next animation. So let's create a new animation. We'll call it, well, we can't actually rename it from here. Sorry, we can rename it from here. So I'll call this turn left. And we are going to just turn the root bone some amount to the left. And so I'm going to lock in the current location and rotation of this with the I key. And then we're going to switch this to XYZ Euler. We're going to go out 30 frames. Well, I'll go to 29. And then we're going to rotate around the Z axis. The Z in this bone is pointing straight up. So maybe we will turn, and we want to make sure this is actually turning to his left, which it is. Let's turn 30 degrees. And then I'm going to hit the I key and set that location and rotation. Okay. Let's switch over to the graph editor, and let's, oh boy, we have a lot in here. So I think what happened here is because I had not changed this when we created this keyframe, it was locking in the W, X, Y, and Z from the quaternion and the XYZ here. What I'm going to do is just select these and delete them. I hit the X key, you can hit the delete key as well. Delete keyframes, and then let's set this to 0, and then we'll do I to lock in the location and the rotation. Now we're only seeing these 6 ones. So because we're rotating, we know we're rotating around the Z, we can hide all of these and we want to view our curve. So let's hit the period key. And see, this is an example of when hitting the period key does not really work very well. So let's see if we can get this to show up properly by grabbing on that circle and then grabbing on this one. Boy, good thing we have these tools. So we want this to be a linear one as well. So we'll select it, right click, interpolation mode, and then linear. So that'll make it turn left very consistently as we keep turning if we loop that animation. So this is ready to go. We're going to push it down onto the stack. Just double check this, make sure that this looks good. And then we're going to uncheck it so that it hides it. And then our last animation that we want to do, we'll create a new one. We'll double click this to name it turn right. And we're going to animate this turning to the right. So this, it's already on XYZ. So what I'm going to do is hit the I key, lock in that location and rotation, go to frame 29 again, and then I'm going to rotate the opposite direction, turning to the right, so -30 this time, and then hit the I key, location, rotation. Okay, so this is now on here, or it's almost ready. Let's just set the graph editor. We'll hide all of these, and we want to set this to interpolation mode linear. And we'll push it down onto the stack. And so now in our non-linear animation view, we've got all these. Now I'm kind of curious, if I turn them all on at once, what happens? He's trying to turn and do a bunch of stuff at the same time. It doesn't work well. Whatever, leave it unchecked. So now we've got all 4 of our animations on here, and we should be ready to export this. So we're going to go to File, Export, FBX, and the only things I want to change here are FBX unit scale, and you might want to check just to see in armatures and, well, sorry, not armatures, in animations. You can look and you can see that it's sending out the NLA strips and all actions. I would just leave it as is. You might be able to make a cleaner export if you mess with it, but I'm not going to mess with it. So I'm going to call this, I'm just going to add animated on the end of this and export it. And then we're going to bring it into Unity. We're going to come in, we're going to right click, import new asset, bring in this guy. And then we should, if we did everything right, have a number of clips here, penguin, and then that pipe forward. And so that was the benefit of renaming this armature to penguin here, and this mesh to penguin mesh, because it'll make it nice and clean. And when you expand this, you can tell which one is the armature and which one is the mesh by having renamed it to that. So that's pretty cool. The other thing you want to do when you have this imported right away is go into Rig and make sure that you change the root node to, under here, penguin root. So that's going to make it so that when we do something called applying root motion, it will use that root motion appropriately. Root motion basically means it's going to move the penguin if we've told it to move the root bone. So when we turn, if we loop that, it'll just keep turning. If we go forward, if we loop that, it'll keep going forward. So all of these now that we have in this animation tab, we also want to loop them. So I'm going to come here and click both of these checkboxes to loop them. Same thing here, same thing here, same thing here. And I'm going to apply. And then let's just preview some of these animations. So down here, you can see that as he's looping, because we've set the root bone, he's just moving forward continuously. Idle, he's just going to kind of look back and forth. Turn left. And turn right. Now this video is probably getting a little long, so let's call it a break for here, and in the next video we'll come back and we will hook this up to player input and a blend node so that we can control this thing and have him slide around on our snow.